Human testing reached new heights, literally and figuratively, when on August 16, 1960, Captain Joseph Kittinger stepped out of an open-air gondola at 102,800 feet and free fell earthward for 14 miles. For Kittinger, there were no guarantees. No guarantees that his chute would open, that his hands wouldn't freeze, that he wouldn't lose consciousness, or that he wouldn't be torn apart as he broke through the sound barrier, his body protected only by his thermal suit. But his jump was vital if scientists were to solve one of the most troubling problems facing pilots. How did one safely escape from jets at the incredible new altitudes aircraft were now reaching? The answer would involve some of the most daring human research of its kind. Today, paratroopers use parachutes with little thought. They jump, they pull the ripcord, they see the silks blossom above them. It is matter of fact. Even the most inexperienced do it. Not so in the early 1900s. Then, the mere idea of parachuting was controversial. Scientists theorized that it was better to stay with the aircraft no matter what, than to bail out and most certainly lose consciousness or the ability to reason during the freefall. You had a slim chance in the crippled plane, they argued. You had none if you jumped. It wasn't until 1922 that this silly myth was dispelled. On October 20th, a young flight lieutenant's biplane, Lieutenant Harris's, went into a death dive over McCook Field, Ohio. At 2,500 feet, Harris pushed himself out of the crate and free fell 1,000 feet before his chute opened. Lieutenant Harris became one of aviation's first human guinea pigs. and his miraculous story quickly spread through the ranks. But even though he proved the theorists wrong, he failed to quiet their protestations. A 1,000-foot free fall was fine, they now said, but anything over that was certain death. And so another jump was planned, this one with a 2,000-foot free fall, monitored by scientists and filmed, and the pundits were finally silenced. Rarely has human testing been as indispensable to flight as it has been in the development and proof testing of escape and egress systems. Be it a planned airdrop or an emergency, anytime a human leaves an aircraft in flight, thorough flight testing has preceded it, including human tests. Consider the simple act of parachuting. You have a plane, you have a jumper, and you have a door. The situation is under complete control. What could be simpler? In truth, almost anything. For instance, what are the safest airspeeds for the jumper? Or the maximum airspeeds? And what about the unforeseen? Tangles and snags have to be expected. Mistakes happen. What about groups of jumpers? What is the correct spacing? And what is the correct length of the static line if the chute is to clear the tail or the stabilizers? The testing starts with crash test dummies, one after the other, thrown out the door. Their actions captured on high-speed film. The footage, an art form in itself. Crash test dummies are also used in the development and testing of emergency escape systems, such as ejection seats and ejection capsules. Here, dummies arc through the air above the test tracks that engineers use to rocket cockpit structures up to the airspeeds encountered in modern flight, 500 to 1,000 miles per hour. Cockpits are more than command centers. They are highly engineered cocoons of life, protecting pilots from obvious hazards like bird strikes to subtle dangers like depleted oxygen and air pressure differentials at high altitudes. The cockpit is the boundary between life and death. But the irony of this is that as cockpits improved and became safer, it also became riskier and harder to get the pilot out. The first step in an emergency ejection is to blast away the cockpit canopy. Despite how seemingly obvious the destructive forces are, they are in fact studied and engineered to blow the canopy shards clear of the pilot. Next comes the ride up the rails and the sweeping arc into the sky where pilot seat separation occurs. Crash test dummies help in the analysis of this process because they are built with the same weight distribution as humans. The final sequence in the ejection process is the chute. Although it looks like it comes too late to do any good, the pilot's fall is cushioned the instant the chute fully blossoms, often just before hitting the ground. The most important test of an ejection seat is the final one, the human test. In this first ejection, Air Force Major Mazza is the volunteer and will punch out from an altitude of 10,000 feet at 485 miles per hour. Thankfully, the ejection mechanism worked flawlessly, but the blast of the slipstream ripped Mazza's helmet off. Reinforcements were made, and the following tests were uneventful. This footage, which has been used in numerous Air Force training films, captures a live human ejection from a crippled A-10 Warthog. It is valuable footage because it clearly captures each of the sequences in the ejection process during an actual emergency. Supersonic escape systems are mechanically the most complex systems carried by an aircraft. They are designed around the absolutely critical act of safely throwing the pilot into the supersonic wind blast. Both of the two major systems to enter early military service, the B-58 escape capsule and the F-106 ejection seat, incorporated mechanical links that wrap the pilot with blast deflectors. Each of these systems went all the way up to a complete, live, human test ejection. This remarkable footage captures the first human test of the supersonic seat. The F-106 has climbed to speed and altitude. On cue, cameras in the cockpit capture the ejection sequence. Wind blast deflectors push up from the pilot's seat while others wrap the feet and hands. The seat fires up the rail and rotates into the slipstream, stabilizes, and then blasts free of the aircraft. Exterior cameras filming at ultra-high speeds capture the rotation from a tail-mounted camera, wing cams, and from the chase plane. Although blasted by a 750 mile-per-hour plus wind, nothing goes wrong during the critical entry into the slipstream. Note the stabilizing rods as they deploy. These rods create drag to prevent over-rotation during the ejection from the aircraft. Seat separation is a sequence of chutes to progressively slow the pilot down. It is uneventful, and the chase aircraft tracks the relieved volunteer to the ground. America's nuclear bomber fleet became the world's fastest with the introduction of the B-58 Hustler, the first of only 2 U.S. bombers ever to fly supersonic. The B-58 could reach speeds in excess of Mach 2 and would routinely cruise at 45,000 feet.
On 28 February 1962 at Edwards Air Force Base, Chief Warrant Officer E.J. Murray became the first human to eject in the B-58 escape capsule.
This performance capability, however, created an enormous problem. How did one get out of a supersonic bomber in the event of an emergency? The answer was the Kitty Hawk escape capsule. This animation demonstrates the basic operating mechanism. The capsule automatically surrounds the pilot, yet provides for visible access to the flight controls, and then ejects into the supersonic slipstream. As these segments from official Air Force programs show, the capsule was tested over and over again. Center of gravity variables, CGs, were of particular concern. The capsule's aerodynamics were tricky. Merely shifting the pilot's position inside the capsule would cause the CG to shift, and at some point, that would cause the capsule to fly out of control. It was understandably important, therefore, to know CG parameters. Using chimpanzees and bears as human stand-ins, test sequences found the answers.
In October 1961 was to demonstrate that realignment of the rocket nozzle would not degrade the capsule's trajectory. The subject was again a bear, the CG configuration being heavy man seat down. As per plan, ejection occurred with the aircraft rolling at 100 knots. This test, which saw all systems functioning perfectly and the bear recovered in good condition, gave well-rounded proof that among the first supersonic ejection of the capsule took place on 21 March with a bear as occupant. Speed was Mach 1.3, altitude 35,000 feet. Height of ejection above the B-58 flight pattern was 225 feet. All hardware and instrumentation functioned perfectly. After a descent lasting 7 minutes and 49 seconds, the capsule impacted in the design attitude. For the next ejection, on June 20th, conditions were deliberately arranged for maximum pitch up in the capsule as an even more demanding test of the corrective measures taken. With the bear again scheduled to occupy the B-58 second station, CG was positioned for light man seat up. This was in fact to be a test in actual flight of the extreme up CG as measured under experimental conditions on 100 human subjects at Stanley. Altitude was 40,000 feet and speed a subsonic Mach 0.8 in order to accentuate pitch up. During descent, accelerations were as predicted. All systems performed well with the exception of one flower pot, which was found not to have repositioned correctly with the boom. The bear suffered no ill effects.
But what of Chief Warrant Officer Murray's ejection? The human body is similar to, but quite different from the animals. No one could be sure if the subtle variances would throw the capsule outside of its design limitations. Murray would provide the answer, becoming the first human to eject in the Kitty Hawk capsule. As it turned out, it was a little jolting, perhaps hard to equalize ear pressure during the descent, but the Kitty Hawk was a go. One of the oddest looking escape systems was the ejection mechanism for the X-15 rocket plane. The seat had to work at 1,000 miles per hour. Stabilizers extend to control the seat in flight. The remaining question, though, is survival. Could a human survive the 1,000 mile per hour wind blast? The test track proved they could. Another unusual system was the bottom bailout. Although it looks amusing, the idea of sliding down a tube and out of the plane was actually a good one for interior crew seats. These tests attempted to set the limits of bottom bailouts in terms of airspeed. Note the violent wind forces encountered at 350 knots. Both the helmet and the boot are torn off the human volunteer. Several frontline jets used bottom bailouts and downward ejection seats, including the B-47. These human tests proved that the survivability envelope was also within the operating speeds of the nuclear bomber. The most unusual test programs conducted by the military involved the use of odd-looking crash test dummies, high-altitude balloons, and human tests that in every respect were nothing short of heroic. These were Projects High Dive and Excelsior, projects designed to develop safe high-altitude escape systems for aircraft. The working theory in high flight was that a pilot had to drop to lower altitudes before the parachute opened. Nothing could be worse than being suspended in the upper atmosphere, carried horizontally by upper air currents, risking death from the extreme cold or from the severely thin air. Thus, an extended free fall would be a necessary part of an upper atmosphere escape system. But no one knew how the human body behaved aerodynamically. Joe Kittinger found out. The quest for sophisticated high-altitude escape systems began with hot air balloons, gondolas, and Rube Goldberg contraptions, designed to take mysterious-looking test dummies aloft and drop them. The pioneering work was completed in the early 1950s in a series of drop tests called, appropriately, Operation High Dive. High Dive was designed to study the flight characteristics of the human body during a free fall from high altitudes. These tests would help engineers design the parachutes needed to safely recover a pilot ejecting during an emergency. First, though, it was necessary to get to higher altitudes. Rockets weren't yet large enough to launch big payloads, so it became the job of high-altitude balloons and gondolas. multi-purpose high-dive capsule was developed to test several components in high-altitude escape systems. Test dummies were merely strapped to its side and dropped. A far simpler concept, however, was the wireframe crate seen here. Two dummies could be rigged together and then released one after the other. The dummies themselves are called anthropomorphic dummies, a word meaning that it matched the physical characteristics of a human body. The weight is about the same as a full-grown man. It is distributed, as weight would be, on the human torso, and even details like the nose are included because they could trigger a vortice that might cause the body to spin. Spinning, indeed, was the principal problem uncovered in high dive. You can see it from cameras mounted on the dummies. The dummies invariably go into a violent flat spin. Drogue chutes were required to stabilize the body during the long free fall. Like many balloon tests, how they come to an end was largely uncontrollable. This high dive capsule's mission ends in the trees. Before Project Excelsior would begin, a short series of tests were conducted to determine if man could actually survive sustained flights in the upper atmosphere. Scientists already knew that radiation levels increased the higher one flew, but they didn't know if the levels were high enough to be dangerous to the human pilot. They also needed to know something about the small capsules that would mark space flight. Jammed as they were with instruments, were they too confining? How intensely claustrophobic were they? Would a human suffer a nervous breakdown inside these tiny cabins? As evil as it sounds, the only way to find out was to send a human aloft and see if he broke. Project Manhigh was the experiment that did just that. Attached to a balloon, the Manhigh capsule ascended to a record altitude of 102,000 feet and remained aloft for 33 hours. The capsule unceremoniously came down in a muddy ditch. But otherwise, the news was good. There were no signs of ill effects. Operations High Dive and Man High ended, Project Excelsior began. It was now time to replace the test dummies and enclosed capsules with an open gondola that would carry a man to 70,000 feet, then 100,000 feet, where he would jump, free-falling, for miles. Captain Kittinger was the volunteer, and his work would go down in the history books, setting records that stand today. Researchers knew Excelsior would take a human into the extreme cold and thin air of the upper atmospheres. And to survive that, Kittinger was dressed in 150 pounds of thermal protection. Layer after layer went on, every inch of his body protected from the certain frostbite that would occur if any skin was ever exposed. But first, jumps from lower altitudes, out of the back of a cargo plane. No safer in the end, but with fewer variables. Three jumps were made during Excelsior, two from 70,000 feet and the third from 102,000 feet. Footage from the first two jumps shows Kittinger's strobe chute. Then, as the parachute blossoms, footage from the helicopters track him as he descends. Finally, the third jump. In the early hours of the day, Kittinger is dressed while the balloon is inflated. Layer by layer, it goes on, one strap after the other. Data packs are attached. Telemetry circuits are tested. And then into the gondola and out to the balloon. Kittinger set the world record for a parachute jump, the most incredible human test ever conducted by the Air Force. The final jump was made from exactly 102,800 feet. The free fall lasted more than 4 minutes. Temperatures of 94 degrees below zero were recorded. And Kittinger broke the sound barrier, protected only by the thermal suit he wore. Kittinger proved something. Proved that pilots in high-flying aircraft like the U-2 and the SR-71 could successfully escape emergencies, even from the ultra-high altitudes that was their stock in trade. It's unnatural to step out of a gondola and drop for no less than 14 miles. But that's exactly what it took to make high-altitude flight safe. Without a doubt, the volunteers that did such things did so at great personal risk, becoming human guinea pigs so that others might survive. For that, they have become quiet heroes in the military flight community and enjoy a level of respect reserved solely for those that place others before themselves.